Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss.
January 28th, 1986, the 25th mission of the Space Shuttle. It was meant to be a moment of triumph. A teacher was going to space, proving that the final frontier was open to everyone. The world watched, breath held, as Challenger cleared the tower on a pillar of fire. For 73 seconds, it was a symbol of human ambition. Then, it became a scar on the collective memory. We were told it was a tragic accident, an unforeseen technical failure, an acceptable risk in the perilous business of space exploration. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the disaster wasn't an accident at all, but the predictable result of a fatal decision? A decision made against the desperate warnings of engineers who knew with chilling certainty what was about to happen. There's a version of the Challenger story you've never heard, a story of a secret battle fought the night before launch, of a horrifying truth hidden from the public, and of a corporate cover-up that cost 7 people their lives. Our story begins not on that bright, cold morning, but in the long, dark night before. While America slept, a small group of engineers at Morton Thiokol, the contractor responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, were locked in a desperate fight. At the center of it was Roger Beaujolais, a brilliant engineer who had become the program's Cassandra, cursed to see a future no one in power wanted to believe. Alongside him were Bob Ebeling and other concerned colleagues. They weren't battling deadlines. They were trying to stop a ghost they had seen before. The ghost was in the data. The forecast for launch morning at Kennedy Space Center was a record-breaking 18 degrees Fahrenheit. To most, an insignificant detail. To them, a death sentence. The shuttle's giant solid rocket boosters were assembled in segments. At each joint, 2 rubber O-rings, each 1/3 of an inch thick, were the only things preventing over 5,000-degree gas from escaping. To work, these rings had to be resilient. They had to instantly energize and press into their seals at the moment of ignition. But rubber in extreme cold loses its resiliency. It becomes stiff, brittle. It fails to seal. This wasn't a theory. Beaujolais and his team had the evidence. They had memos, test results, and disturbing post-flight photos from previous missions showing blow-by, black soot streaking past O-rings that had failed to seal properly. The most damning evidence came from Mission 51C, launched a year earlier in a then chilly 53 degrees. It had experienced the most severe O-ring erosion ever seen. They had been lucky. On the night of January 27th, the engineers presented their data to their managers and NASA officials in an emergency teleconference. Their conclusion was unequivocal, backed by every piece of engineering analysis they had. Launching below 53 degrees Fahrenheit was an unacceptable risk. The data simply did not support a launch in the predicted cold. But NASA was a giant under pressure. The Teacher in Space program, with Krista McAuliffe as its star, was a public relations masterpiece. She wasn't just an astronaut, she was a symbol, and President Reagan was set to mention her in his State of the Union address. Repeated delays had made the agency look incompetent. Larry Malloy, NASA's booster project manager, was audibly frustrated. In a moment that would become infamous, he reversed the fundamental principle of engineering safety, asking Morton Thiokol, "My God, Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April?" The pressure worked. Morton Thiokol's management, worried about their multi-million-dollar contract, asked for a 5-minute recess, off the phone line. They turned to their engineers and asked them to put on their management hats. When the engineers refused to change their recommendation, their bosses made a decision that would echo through history. They voted, as managers, to overrule their own technical experts. They approved the launch. Roger Boisjoly walked back into his office, defeated. He wrote in his journal, "I sincerely hope that we are all wrong." The next morning, the launch pad itself was a monument to the engineers' warnings. It was draped in ice. In the crew compartment, 7 astronauts, including Krista McAuliffe, who was minutes away from teaching the first lesson from space, ran through their final checklists, unaware of the battle that had been lost for their lives the night before. As the countdown reached 0, in an office hundreds of miles away in Utah, Roger Boisjoly watched a television screen, knowing that deep within the incomprehensible complexity of Challenger's propulsion system, the seals were already failing. At the moment of ignition, a puff of black smoke appeared near the aft field joint of the right booster. It was the O-ring, too cold to energize, failing to seal. For 2.5 seconds, hot gas and soot escaped before a temporary seal of burning fuel residue plugged the hole. For a moment, it seemed disaster had been averted. But as Challenger ascended, it encountered the strongest aerodynamic forces of its flight path. The vibration and stress shattered the fragile temporary seal. A flickering tongue of flame emerged from the joint, a 5,000-degree blowtorch aimed directly at the external fuel tank. 58 seconds into the flight, it was visible from the ground. 73 seconds in, the flame burned through the tank. 500,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and oxygen were unleashed. What the world witnessed was not a simple explosion, it was a catastrophic structural breakup. The fireball was the result of the propellants igniting, but the orbiter itself, with the crew compartment, broke away from the inferno, largely intact. In the aftermath, a comforting lie was propagated. The crew died instantly, unaware of what was happening. This was meant to spare the families and the public from a far more horrifying truth. Analysis of the recovered crew compartment reveals a different story. The cabin remained pressurized and continued to arc upward for another 25 seconds before beginning its final terrible descent. When the wreckage was recovered from the ocean floor, investigators made a chilling discovery. 3 of the astronauts' personal egress air packs, emergency oxygen supplies, had been activated. This means at least some of the crew were alive, conscious and aware. They fought for control they no longer had during a 3-minute fall from 65,000 feet, from the edge of space to the cold Atlantic below. The cockpit voice recorder captured the last words from pilot Michael Smith. Not a scream of terror, but a simple, chilling, professional utterance. Uh-oh. They didn't just die. They fell, knowing their fate was sealed. The cover-up began almost immediately. NASA officials framed the disaster as an anomaly, stonewalling investigators and instructing Morton Biakal employees not to speak about the pre-launch arguments. The truth only emerged because of the moral courage of a few. Alan MacDonald, Morton Biakal's senior representative at the launch site, had refused to sign the launch recommendation that morning. He testified honestly before the Rogers Commission, the presidential body investigating the disaster. Roger Boisjoly provided his memos, his data, his journal, the irrefutable paper trail of a disaster foretold. For telling the truth, these men were treated like traitors. They were demoted, ostracized, and their careers were sidelined. They were heroes who paid a heavy price. The investigation revealed a deeply flawed corporate culture at both NASA and its contractor, a culture of normalization of deviance, where known engineering flaws were repeatedly accepted until they became a normal part of operations. The Challenger disaster forced NASA into its longest ever hiatus. The booster joints were completely redesigned. New safety protocols were put in place. The agency promised it had learned its lesson. But memories fade. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry. The investigation that followed found the same cultural sickness that had doomed Challenger: schedule pressure, a dismissal of engineering concerns, and the normalization of deviance. The echoes were undeniable. For decades, the story seemed closed. But the ocean holds its secrets. In 2022, a documentary crew searching for a World War II aircraft stumbled upon a large, hauntingly familiar object on the seabed. It was a 20-foot section of Challenger's fuselage, a piece of the tragedy resurfacing after 36 years in the dark. NASA confirmed the find, a solemn reminder that the past is never truly buried. It lies there today, a monument to 7 brave souls, and a warning. A warning that the greatest dangers in our quest for the stars are not technical failures or the unforgiving vacuum of space. They are the far more human failures of pride, pressure, and the choice to ignore the quiet voice of truth. A reminder that the final frontier is not just in the heavens, but in the difficult human choice between what is easy and what is right.